Boom! There it is, ladies and gentlemen. Going to a job every single day, 9 to 5, can be kind of time consuming. You got to figure out a way to make some passive income. And that is what today's topic is all about. So if you're ready to learn about making some passive income, this one's for you. Here we go.
Shut up and sit down.
Look, a business can give you everything you want in life: prestige, wealth, freedom. It can also take everything away from you. This show is for those who are willing to take that risk. These are the real life stories of entrepreneurs. But before we start, I have one small favor to ask. Please leave a comment. It can be advice, critiques, tips, feedback, or share this with someone, because your engagement is the most valuable and most powerful form of social currency. So thank you, and welcome to another episode of Business Boss. All right, if you have extra cash just sitting in an account somewhere, you're literally losing money. You put that money to work now. And there are many asset classes that you can choose from, but if it's passive investing that you're looking for, then today's episode is for you. There are a ton of things to consider when investing in real estate, like research, evaluation, inspections, ROIs, and more. So investing can always feel a little overwhelming. But today's guest is going to take on all that work so that passive investing can be just that, passive. So let's find out more as we talk real estate investing with Mr. Spencer Hilligoss. All right, I told you we were going to have some fun, Spencer. Welcome to the program.
Oh, man, Hernan, that has to be, I'm sure you've heard this before, but the best, most hyped intro of any show that I've ever seen or heard or been on. So thanks,
man. That's what it's about. We told you it's all about having some fun content, talking about what it is you do. Speaking of what it is that you do, real estate investing. In my class, we're literally about to talk about mortgages, debt to income ratios, all these different types of topics. So it's perfect that you're here talking to us about real estate. Tell me a little bit about your background. How'd you get into this space?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I never in my life thought I would wake up every day and say I'm a full-time real estate investor. I grew up playing in a bunch of bands and punk and metal bands, hence all the tattoos that people don't typically see underneath the collared shirts. My dad was actually a broker in real estate for 30 years. So I grew up out here in the Bay Area, California, born and raised in Redwood City. I live in Alameda, which is just on the other side of the Bay Area, if you don't know the Bay Area, California well. And I worked for his business as a teenager, even younger than that. You know, he was making me do, preparing houses for sale or rental at a young age. And at the time, I really didn't like that. I thought it was more fun to hang out with my friends, of course. And in Silicon Valley, where I grew up and I'm living now, it's not exactly cool to tell your friends that you work for your dad's real estate company. The cool thing to work on is working in tech companies. So that's ultimately where most of my career took me. I joined fintech or finance tech companies. I was there for 13 years across 5 companies. I never wanted to be a manager necessarily, never wanted to get into leadership, but that's basically what happened. I mean, I found myself kind of stumbling into a company and then got the right mentor and ultimately met a couple others along the way, worked incredibly hard and got up to the point where I was at about 20, 25, 26, leading teams of 200 plus people. And at the time, I thought that was, I was pretty cool. I thought I had really accomplished it. And in hindsight, I was so far over my skis, I took some big learnings from that period of time because it was tough and it was a rough period of time. The one other thing I was going to share briefly, Hernan, before I pass it back to you for a moment, is that now what we do at Madison Investing, and I'm committed to, is helping folks kind of get the light bulb moment that I wish I had gotten way earlier. I was working hard, 80 to 100 hours a week in tech companies for 13 years. I have 2 young kids. I want to be a more present dad like I am now, but it took me too long to get that memo. And my family went through a tough thing we called the dark decade in our family, where lost a younger brother to cancer, parents got divorced, a bunch of other stuff happened. And unfortunately, we ended up having to make some tough, big downsizing decisions along that journey. Now, I want to instill those same principles into the way that we manage the wealth and build wealth for our family and help other people do it too. There's just different ways to think about it. And maxing out my 401ks at my old employer was not necessarily the ticket to financial freedom or passive investing. It was a ticket for me getting locked into a career that I wasn't super excited about anymore for decades, and not seeing my young kids for very often for weeks at a time. So that was a diatribe, but wanted to give you some color behind it.
No, and I kind of want to hover on that because you grew up in Silicon Valley, right? Silicon Valley, for all intents and purposes, is the birthplace of social media and a lot of tech companies that are there, right? I mean, you have Google there, you have a lot of different companies that are, I mean, global companies that are that reside in Silicon Valley, and so I'd imagine growing up there was a pretty affluent community. And you have certain expectations. You talked about how it'd be cool to work in tech. It's not cool to work in real estate, but oftentimes you have a lot of successful entrepreneurs that turn to real estate once they've made some of that money, to park some of that money in those types of investments. And I'm curious, when you were along the lines of thinking, I'm going to go into the tech business, did you still have that mentality of, we're going to create the next Uber, we're going to create the next Facebook, and that's really why I'm getting into this space, to kind of go from zero to hero in like 2 months time? Or were you kind of understanding that this is more of a long-term play?
You nailed it. You completely nailed it. I mean, to add to that, I thought I would follow this kind of, like, I call it like the unwritten Silicon Valley wealth strategy, right? And it's kind of like a lottery, like the Silicon Valley lottery. And you want to join the next big company. It's going to have a massive IPO and everyone's going to pop champagne. And suddenly it's going to absolve all those financial sins along the way. And just to kind of go, full disclosure here for myself, I'll say this is coming from the position of, I joined my first tech company as a full-time employee when I was going in thinking, okay, I'm going to build up some capital. I'm going to make good income. And I took a bet on jumping into a sales role. That first year and a half, I made way more than I thought I would. And I thought I was pretty cool. So I decided to take some time off and do a gap year. I thought that gap year that other people had around the world, and some people have now in the US, which is cool, that was something that wasn't a big deal for me to take. I not only spent all the money I had, I went into $30,000 in credit card debt. And then I had to build back up from there the hard way, all the way back from a customer support rep to then leading the team of 200 people 5 years later. So it's all that stuff I bring up because the glamour that you're alluding to here, Hernan, about like, hey, if I go join the next big company, if it's Uber, Lyft, Facebook, Airbnb, big IPO, we all like the sound of that. But unfortunately, the reality is that the people who work in these companies, the employees, they might go in. The only people who are really going to get equity, like the holdings, the shareholdings that are going to have a big dollar amount tied to them at exit, are the ones who are there and they're so early, they're like a founder or they're one of the early leaders and they have a big chunk of that equity. Most people aren't going, even if they are there for the exit, it's not life-changing money. And so it doesn't set someone up for most people, if they even get at that company, to where it's going to somehow get them the ultimate get out of jail free card and set them up for life. And so I think that was very much a strategy that explicitly or even subconsciously we were running with for quite some time. And Jennifer, who's my wife and my co-founder and COO at our company, she had her own career too. You have to have, at least in these pricey markets like the Bay Area, you got to have dual income oftentimes. Even if you're making good income for one, you got to have two coming in if you want to start a family and buy a house and all these big milestone stages. And so I want to share that with people too, because you can think that you're winning. You can think that you're playing the game right. But ultimately, I really wish that I had seen that real estate not only is cool for my definition now, it would have catapulted us. We would have saved a decade. We would have gone so much faster buying anything in 2008, 2009, when I was sitting renting the most expensive apartment I could find in Denver, thinking I was pretty cool, and I was living in Colorado. If I had bought even a single family home or house hacked, buying a duplex and living in one, renting out the other, these are all things that my younger years people can do, and I wish I had done.
You can't handle the truth.
That's it, right? That's the reality of the life that we live in, though. We kind of we believe one thing when we're younger, thinking we're making the right moves, and then hindsight is always 2020. It's what we see later on down the road. But at least we get to take these life lessons and kind of pass them on, right? And this is what you're doing with the real estate investing side. Teaching people, especially in today's market where interest rates are rising, the real estate market is not doing as hot as it was, even 6 months ago. And so people are getting in a position, like I know right now, you talked about having 30,000 in debt, right? There's people who've made a lot of money over the last few years. You see this in athletes all the time, professional athletes. You see this in lottery winners. That happens a lot. You don't understand what it takes to earn and to make money. All you've known your entire life is how to spend. And so when you're given a large amount of money, or earn a large amount of money in your case, all you knew how to do was to spend it. Like, you literally continue to move forward, spending the way your habits have been put in place. And then you're giving up the opportunity cost of some of these investments that were there. You talk about 2008, 2000, those were, I bought a flip property, and I'm in San Diego. So our prices are right now, a condo will probably run you about 450, maybe 500 grand. I bought it for 77,000 in 2000, and I want to say 2010. And it was that same idea. It was, let's flip it. But I made my own real estate mistakes as well. So when you talk to people who are getting into this space, especially with a market like today, what are you telling them as far as becoming a passive investor, and when real estate just doesn't sound so sexy?
Yeah, I'm always going for two objectives when it comes to connecting people in this world and in this role. And that's one of a fellow investor. I'm coming in saying, just tell me what you're trying to accomplish. What are your goals? We all tend to jump ahead of that. So number one is, what are they trying to accomplish, right? Are they planning on leaving a job behind? If they already have one, maybe they, God forbid, like their job. There's a lot of people who actually do. I think that's in the real estate investing community, for folks that haven't kind of picked up this vibe yet. A lot of folks tend to go pretty hard and critique, and they're kind of ruthless about the corporate world. Frankly, I had a much more positive experience in the corporate world than that. There was brutally hard times, like anything else. But I think that I had a really good experience there. So what's someone's goal? I mean, are they trying to go and quit and pivot and do, sit on a beach full time? I mean, they're going to get bored if that's the case. I'll tell you right now. But I think that ultimately, maybe they want to stay in their job. Maybe they want to pivot. So what's your goal? Number two is, I just try to educate them and encourage them to do the same. Because to your point exactly, Hernan, I mean, kudos to you on buying a 77K property in a market like San Diego at that moment in the market cycle. Education is key. And the biggest myth out there, I think, that just shoots the 99.9% of people that are out there more. They've never bought real estate in their life, or invested in a private deal or a fund. And they sit there reading and devouring content and thinking they're getting ready, quote unquote, for the big moment, the big correction, the big recession, whatever that might be. But they don't actually take action in the form of, well, try to go do something, like buy a deal. That's the real learning from there. You can educate. I read 24 books in an 18-month period. That was education to me. That was over the top. People don't need to do that. What I would recommend doing, I could have read 4, maybe 6. I listened to 400 plus podcasts during that same 18 months when I first got started, just like yours right here, providing quality education to people who are trying to get started. That you still got to do that. There's no getting around that. But the real education starts when you go out and you start doing stuff. So when I'm talking to passive investors, here's the key question that I ask them first is, you can build passive income streams, or you can buy them. And I'm oversimplifying this, but I think that's a really helpful decision point that people tell me they wish they had heard earlier. If you have time, but you're limited on capital, and that's mostly folks who are coming out of college or high school. That was me when I was in 30K of debt. I had more time than I realized. And if you don't have kids, I promise you have more time than you probably realize. You don't want to hear that right now from some dude sitting here on the show, but I'll tell you right now, you do. You have more time, than you think. You can go build income streams, and that means putting in some sweat equity, putting in the hustle to do some work on deals yourself. Whether it's like a flip, whether that is a BRRRR project, buy, rehab, renovate, all that stuff. Or there's all kinds of strategies you could do. You could buy income streams. And if you buy income streams, then you better believe you're going to pay for it. So in passive deals, you can go invest in a rental. You can buy a rental and just hold it. It's not fully passive. You're still going to have to manage a manager. Maybe you manage that thing hands-on, but it's going to pay you a rent every month. But you got to learn how to do that, because here's an example. I bought a $430,000 duplex in Vallejo, California, 45 minutes north of me. And you probably know where that is or not, but maybe some of the audience doesn't. That cash flowed $200 a month, still does now. It's gone up in value immensely, but I would go back in time and not do that deal that way again, if at all, because that first purchase of ours, we didn't understand cash flow and cash flow goal setting. And cash flow, I mean, you already know this, but for the audience's sake, that just means I'm going to go put in that. We put in $100,000 of cash, and then we took out a loan, went and bought that property. That same 100K, we could have put to use to get way more mileage in terms of how much cash flow, income, mailbox money, to use the corny term, that would be coming into us every month. But we didn't understand that yet. We didn't understand what it meant to cash flow invest. So that was an example of, you could buy income streams or you can build income streams, but just don't rush into thinking, oh, I'm going to go do a single family because that sounds like a good idea. I heard some dude on a podcast say that, or I'm going to go jump into doing apartments because some dude said that. It's even higher level than that. Like, what are you trying to accomplish, and what's the time availability, and what's your motivation? Because you got to do it.
Yeah. And I think this is where mentorship really comes in handy, right? Because what you're describing is how to accelerate your money. That $100,000, when you put it to work at $200 cash flow, the cash on cash return is not very good. In other words, you described BRRRR, right? That strategy where you're buying something, you're renovating it, you're getting it. But the key part of that BRRRR is that last R, which you're going to refinance, so you can pull that money back out, so that your initial investment goes into a deal, but you get that money back out so you can put it to work. I've made the same mistake a lot, not even understanding that, right? Not understanding, I love cash flow. Cash flow is great. A couple $100 a month is amazing. That could change a lot of people's life. Shoot, that's a filling up your gas tank today type thing, right? But it still makes a big difference. But if you could understand how to accelerate the money in, and how fast can you get that money back out? And I think that's really some of those big deal investment strategies. When you start talking about, you're over there in Silicon Valley, when you start looking at investors, is I'm going to put money into this deal. How soon can I get my money out? When you watch Shark Tank, for example, they're all thinking the same thing. I'm going to put my money in. How soon do I get my money back out? And as an investor, that exit strategy is so important. You need to understand how you're getting out of this deal before you get into the deal at the very beginning. And you also brought up something else I kind of want to dive into, which is defining passive, right? Because passive for one person is a completely different thing for another, right? When you're getting into a deal, you buy a rental, it's not necessarily 100% passive if you're self-managing. But if you're a limited partner, or you're putting money into a REIT or a syndication, for example, all of a sudden it's very passive, but your returns are limited. So when people work with you, how do you define passive to them and in their comfort zone? And how does the deal get structured that way?
This is a fun topic, man. I really appreciate you going there. And it's just a smart question, because I think a lot of folks oversimplify this. And it's not that complex at a high level, but it's so important to wrap your head around, because I literally just this morning, to give you guys a real-time, real human being example, had an hour-long conversation with a dad, 2 kids. It could be anyone, but this was his brief story. He bought 2 buildings, managed them himself, sold them, made a very large profit. When I asked him what he would do differently, he would say, I wouldn't do that again. And he wouldn't do it again, even though he made a very large profit, because throughout that time, it was painful for him. He managed them himself, even though it was in his neighborhood, even though he could get there closely to him, lived outside of Boston, expensive market nationally. And it went well financially. Did it go well lifestyle wise? Did it go well stress level wise? I don't know. It didn't sound like it to me, and not according to him. And so I would say there's 3 categories, the way I describe it to our passive investors and the group members who join our investing group. And that would be, you have active, semi-passive, and then fully passive. Active, some examples would be like a flip. You buy a property, you're actively doing that work yourself. Another active would be, you are a syndicator. Or if you want to go out and you want to buy a big apartment, could be any big property, but you're going to go do all the work of pulling together passive investors. You're the active one. You're the manager. You're called the general partner of the GP. You're going to go find a bunch of LPs, a bunch of limited partners, passive investors, and they're the ones who are investing their capital, putting that at risk for you to go find the deal, manage that deal, add value to that deal, or in some cases, build a brand new building, but that's a higher risk thing. We focus on buildings that are typically there. And that's also active. So those are two active strategies of many that you can go take on. Semi-passive, I would say any form of rental that you own outright. And that even applies if you go and you hire a property manager. And so we had 5 properties, rentals in the middle of Kansas City, Missouri. We bought them and sold them, sold them at a profit over the years. We were getting $200 to $250 a month in cash flow for a purchase price of it mind-blowingly affordable for you and I sitting in California, $60,000 purchase price per. I mean, that's great from a cash flow perspective. You better believe we would get like handwritten, snail mail letters. We would get stuff from the city, from the county. And this is basic stuff. They would happen all the time. And you're covering the property taxes. You get an upset county because one of the tenants happened to put a couch on the front yard and the neighbor didn't like that. So they filed some kind of formal complaint. It's the weirdest, most random stuff, but that's your problem to deal with if you're the owner. So we had to deal with that. That is time is money, and so that is semi-passive in my opinion. Fully passive, which is the way that we invest now. And it's not going to be for everybody, but that's for us, is you're basically still doing the diligence or analyzing, making a decision, an informed decision on the front end. Like once in a blue moon, I'll get a note or an email or a phone call from someone who really wants to give me a piece of their mind because they want to tell me, Spencer, there's no such thing as fully passive because you still have to do the diligence on the deal. And I'm like, well, yeah, how literal do you want to take this example? But okay, sure.
Man, it's your money. You better do the diligence on the deal.
Right. Yeah. Is a savings account passive? You're still betting the bank you're going to put it in with, right? So that's where I draw the line. Is as soon as I wire over my 50K, my 100K, my 25K, the minimums are usually baseline 25K on these fully passive real estate syndications or funds where there's apartment buildings or rentals, even self-storage facilities all over the country. There's tons of these things. You're doing diligence on the front, sending the funds. Once those funds are in, you don't control anything. You're trusting that team. You're also not doing any work. The only work you have to do is, I won't go too far into taxes because that might put some people to sleep, even though I think they're exciting these days compared to what I used to. You have to do taxes. But other than that, you don't do anything. All you do is you receive direct deposit. And when the cash flow proceeds come and hit your bank account. So that's passive to me now.
And that's not bad. That's a great way to look at it. And yes, taxes can be boring, but they can save you a ton of money, especially if you live in California. I love how you talk about living life by design, right? And a couple weeks ago, I had a wholesaler on the show, and it's kind of relevant for me for today, especially because we're going to be talking about mortgages. And one of the things that I like to tell my students is that the bank doesn't really care about you, the person who's buying the place. And especially when it comes to this investment property, you have a lot more skin in the game, but usually it's the property that qualifies, not as much the individual. When you're coming into these things, we talk about first home you're going to buy, it's probably 3.5%. Second one might be 5%. But once you get into that third property, if you're doing it as an individual, you're looking at that 25% marker, because the bank's just not going to loan you that full amount. They know that you don't have as much skin in the game. When you're evaluating some of these investments that you're looking for, how many of them are like way below market value where the bank's like, hell yeah, this is definitely one I want to jump in on? And how many of them are you buying at retail, or do you even buy at retail?
Oh, that's a really smart question. Yeah, I appreciate the focus on the mortgage stuff. I can't go into it to that really good question without somebody saying right out the gates. If folks inherently find mortgages a little dry and boring, you're there with the rest of us. But I would just say debt, this idea of debt, a mortgage is a form of debt. And I used to think like that credit card debt that I racked up in my younger years of 30K, that's what we call bad debt. That stuff has a big interest rate attached. So I'm bleeding those interest payments. There's also good debt, what you're talking about. And what I'm so grateful, I mean, your audience is going to benefit greatly from this, and your students are on, is that good mortgages are good debt often. If they're set up the right way, that's taking on good debt. That's why you see online in forums and posts, real estate investors that know what they're doing, they'll go out and brag how much new debt they just brought on. And that's because they know what they're doing. They know you're basically getting money cheap. You're getting cheap money, and then you're growing with leverage. And so I bring that up because when we're going into these deals, we're buying, apartment buildings that are typically pretty big. And that means that you're also going to get, this is such a counterintuitive thing to your point, man, is that those are bigger. The bigger you go, in a lot of ways, it actually gets easier if you go for a really big property. And so buying like a 2-unit duplex, maybe even up to a quad where you've got 4 units, that can be harder because they're underwriting you as the individual sometimes if you don't have any other assets to your name or limited assets to your name. On the 100+ unit apartment building, they're going to look at that building. They're going to look at the business plan behind that. And a lot of times, thankfully, I structure myself into these partnerships with a very short list of folks who we've built a relationship, and I joint venture with them. They find the deals in places like Texas and Georgia, in North Carolina, South Carolina, Arizona, anywhere outside of California, basically, that has cash flow. They find these deals. Oftentimes they had to negotiate for them, so they'll be off market. They're not buying retail. And as a result, they've already got the banking relationship dialed in. And that lender is going to come in and say, oh yeah, we already know how you guys operate, and we're going to give you a loan. It's going to be a really good loan to value. And then so on and so forth. It's really the debt right now in the year 2022 has certainly gotten a little bit more dynamic. Let's just say it that way.
Expensive.
A little bit more expensive, a lot more expensive. But I think it's so important for folks to step back and look at timescales, big picture. Because if you're getting into this hard assets game and you're going to be investing in real estate, start thinking in decades, man, because this is just a moment in time. It's going to feel painful for a few folks out there. You won't be able to buy as easily. And if my heart goes out to people that are trying to close on their first home, for example, it's a heck of a pricey moment. But man, oh man, debt is a very important concept to understand. And if you can find stuff off market and it's a really big asset and it's going to continue growing in a good market, the lender's going to see that too. So they'll be happy with it.
And we're just scraping the surface when it comes to debt, because once you start understanding the debt structure, you realize that, when I refinance a property and I take my money out, I didn't actually sell it. So I don't have any capital gains. I don't have any income that's acquired there. You mean I can continue to earn money, go out and buy something else, renovate it, raise the value, refinance. And then you wonder why real estate investors, big names like Donald Trump, don't pay income tax. It's because they understand the rules of how this debt game is played, how this tax game is played, and they play by those specific rules. And and that's the thing about, when you talked earlier about making decisions and analyzing the deal and deciding, that's a CEO mentality. At the end of the day, this is your money. This is your decision. You got to decide whether you want to go passive, whether you want to go active, whether you want to let your money sit in a bank or not. But you have to understand the rules because you're living your life by design, whether you design it and it's intentional or it's being designed by your actions. It's your life that you're living by design. Well, Spencer, before we head out, man, I want to make sure if people want to reach out to you, they want to learn more about investing with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the conversation here today, Hernan. This has been a blast, and hopefully the audience got something out of it. Folks can find us at madisoninvesting.com. We actually just launched a new free resource that we're very proud of. We've never done one like this, and we've taken our sweet time getting it out because we think it's just so packed full of valuable stuff for folks. It's a no obligation resource. If they go to our website, it's the Blueprint for Passive Investors. And it's like a 7-day email series, and they can learn everything about the basics, the foundational pieces of how we look at deals and how folks can get started as passive investors too.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Because everybody wants to get started. Nobody knows where to start. So make sure you guys check that out. You guys can check out more information on Spencer at madisoninvesting.com. He mentioned it scrolling across the bottom of the screen. You can also follow him at LinkedIn at Hilligoss, which is his last name. Shilligoss. That's where he's most active. And then, of course, for those of you who still want to send an email, I'm sure Spencer will respond. Spencer@MadisonInvesting.com. Spencer, any last final thoughts before we head out?
Yeah, I would just encourage folks that regardless of where your interest lies now, be curious. Just find a way to be curious. I mean, I think that that's at the root of wherever direction you want to go in wealth building. If you want to look at your net worth, start there, and then be curious how people go and grow that. Find a way to be curious about the people who are further along than you are, and you want to role model your behaviors after them. If I could go back and say one thing to myself in my younger years, that would be it.
Find a mentor. Somebody's already doing what you want to do. I'm agreeing with you, man. If I can go back to my 20-year-old self, all the mistakes I made, I had a great run, right? It's not like I didn't enjoy my 20s or my 30s, but man, I could have made it so much better with just a few tweaked choices here and there. So yeah, for sure, man. Thank you a lot, Spencer, for coming on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a round of applause. There you go. All right, ladies and gents, we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace, and we're out.
It's over. Go home.
Is your business in need of marketing? Try starting a podcast, but not just any podcast. Podcast like a pro. We can show you how to take your business from being invisible to becoming a brand people trust. Go to www.businessbros.biz